Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Pablo. Thank you. 10, really 13 years of Tell It. One thing at a time. My wife tells me that I am insufficiently self-promotional, so I have this book called Tales from the Trail, short fiction about dogs, mushing, and sled dog races, available all over the world. And here tonight for a special 10th anniversary Tell It price of whatever you want to pay. Which, to be honest, I like to do in hopes that someday someone will pay me $6,000 for a book. And by the way, there will be a short sing-along here. And this piece is called Holding Space. In the 3 decades that I've lived in California, I have seen all sorts of magical thinking and New Age gobbledygook. I have met people who do past life regressions on pets and virtual juice cleanses where remote workers halfway around the world drink juice which somehow magically cleans you out. But in all that time, I've never understood when Californians use the term holding space. And when I'd ask them what that means, they would just say, oh, it's very powerful. But what? How do you hold space? To back up for a second, my father was always very difficult. And for my entire life, I had to do all of the work to communicate with him. My parents got married in the late 1950s. My father was a New York Jew, 3rd-generation Russian immigrant, and my mother was a non-Jewish German born during the Nazi era. I know. My father's parents told him not to marry my mother because she wasn't Jewish. So he bullied her into converting. And needless to say, that didn't satisfy his parents because that was never the real issue at a time when the Holocaust still seemed very fresh and recent for American Jews. Fairly recently, and by that I mean 25 years ago. And don't even get me started on how the early 80s were actually 40 years ago, and that's the real reason why kids today don't know the song Hold Me Now by the Thompson Twins, and not, as I suspect, because kids today just have shitty taste in music. So 25 years ago, I said to my dad, you know, the real problem your parents had with Mom is not that she wasn't Jewish, but that she was German. You realize that, right? And he thought about it for a minute, and then he said, no, I don't think so. Which is just fucking crazy, especially since my father was a psychiatrist. My father never listened, which was ironic since what he specialized in was talk therapy. He would ask me the same questions over and over again and literally could never remember the jobs I had, the projects I'd worked on, or even exactly what it is that I do for a living. He made no attempts to gain knowledge or context about anything, so communicating with him always required figuring out what he had gotten wrong or misinterpreted and then uncovering what was actually going on. He claimed that there was a GM commercial with a character he insisted was named Miss Good Parts, which comes from mishearing that 1970s commercial featuring the slogan, "Get that great GM feeling with genuine GM parts," that featured a guy named Mr. Good Wrench. But when I pointed out what my father had mixed up, he denied it because he was never wrong about anything. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, perhaps, Alex, there was a short-lived ad with Miss Goodparts and you just don't remember it. To which I will say, clearly, you didn't grow up with parents who raised gaslighting to the level of an Olympic sport. And also, because I'm a Virgo and a glutton for punishment, I actually researched this at the Museum of Advertising, and I double-checked with people who've written histories of advertising since the 1960s, even though proving that something never existed is impossible because you can't prove a negative. This may explain my constant migraines and heartburn when I was a kid. About 20 years ago, in a phone conversation with my father, I said I didn't know what to tell him because he didn't listen, he mishears and misinterprets things, and then he jumps to conclusions, and I was just tired of having to sort everything out for him. An hour later, he sent me an email that said, and I quote, "I'm sorry you feel that your mother and I don't love you." And I responded immediately, "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You don't listen to what I said, you jump to conclusions without hearing anyone else, and then you dump it all on me to figure out." I wasn't that angry in the email, or maybe I was, and you just couldn't tell because it was email. In late February 2020, my father developed an inoperable brain tumor. I sensed that this was the beginning of the end, so I made plans to go see him, and then the world shut down. But not his tumor. His tumor kept going, growing. In August, he broke his hip, and he was sent to rehab, and his doctor said the tumor was worse and he only had a few weeks left. And I don't know if you remember the fall of 2020, but travel at that time before vaccines was completely terrifying because anyone who coughed in public could kill you. The senior living place where my parents were required that I wait 14 days after he returned home and had been quarantined before I could come see him. And my therapist warned me that this would be my last chance to say anything to him if there was anything I needed to say. And it took many sessions for me to realize there was nothing I needed to say. I flew to Massachusetts and had to drive 2 hours to get to him. And I'm not claiming that this was the most stressful trip I ever took, but I did search weed maps for recreational marijuana dispensaries in the area, and I may have checked the edibles menu and visited the dispensary and made a purchase. When I got to my dad's, he was awake and alert, and I sat down next to his bed, and he said, "You and I have not always seen eye to eye about things." And I thought, here we go. This is it. This is what he feels like he needs to say to me. This is the reason that he has kept himself alive and waited until I could come visit him. And I answered, no, we have not always seen eye to eye. But rather than continuing, he had an enormous coughing jag. And when it was over, he did not remember what he was going to say. And I tried to get him back on track and to prompt him, but he had no idea what it was that he had started saying and seemed totally unconcerned about this. And I remember thinking, wait, even now I have to do all the work? And then the morphine took hold and he was never fully conscious again. For the next 3 days, I sat with him about 7 hours a day. People are complicated and messy, so I sat in the messiness of my relationship with my father and I sent him good thoughts. I didn't say much, and he didn't say anything, which worked out very well because the problems always started when he would talk. For those 3 days, he was in what I call the in-between place. He was not quite here, but he wasn't yet gone. And I told him a bunch of times that it was okay, and he could go if he needed to. And as I sat there, I had the profound sense that what I was doing was carving out a physical and emotional place in that room. And at some point I realized this is what it means to hold space for someone. And yes, there was power and grace in that more than I imagined. My father, weakened by a lifelong need to be right about everything, despite frequently being wrong, lacked the strength to hold space for anyone. It fell to me to be present and grounded when he could not be. In the end, I got to sit there with him. I desperately wish that he could have done better at any point in my life or his. But I give him credit for doing the best that he could, just like I give myself credit for doing the best that I could with him. He died the day after I flew back to California, without ever telling me the thing he thought was so important that he made himself stay alive to say it, leaving me, as always, to figure his shit out. I'm told that I am the world's worst Jew, incidentally. I am told that there is a Jewish tradition to light candles on the anniversary of deaths. So 1 year after my father died, I got a yahrzeit candle for him. This is not a yahrzeit candle. Yahrzeit candles, you leave them burning until they go out on their own. It probably wouldn't surprise you to know, since I am the world's worst Jew, that I do not know any Hebrew prayers, perhaps because of my family history, but I do believe that it's the intention that counts, right? So when I lit that candle, I thought there was no better way to honor my father than to sing his favorite song, which is, of course, the Teddy Bear's Picnic. This song... I love you guys. This song is from 1932, and my father would sing it to me and my brothers when we were very young. And I am pretty sure, because he was 4 years old in 1932, that his father sang it to him when he was young too. So, if you know it, please, now we come to the sing-along part, sing along. If you go out in the woods today, you'll never believe your eyes. If you go out in the woods today, you're in for a big surprise. For every bear that ever was will gather there for sure, because today's the day the teddy bears have their picnic. Picnic time for teddy bears. The little teddy bears will be having a lot of fun. At 6 o'clock, the mommies and daddies will put the bears to bed because they're tired little teddy bears. Good night, Dad.